Topic that I am going to be teaching about is cellular respiration and how it relates to exercise. Cellular respiration is the metabolic process to convert chemical energy, so that's sugar, specifically glucose from what we eat, so carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, into a usable form of energy, which is called ATP in a cell. And you can think of ATP like gasoline for a car. It is our fuel or our energy currency that we use to perform our everyday tasks. There's three parts to ATP. First is glycolysis, and in between glycolysis and the citric acid cycle is the intermediate stage, which is also known as the bridge stage. And then there's the electron transport chain at the end. Glycolysis occurs in cytosol, and cytosol, you can remember that it's part of the cytoplasm. So, and that is what holds the organelles in a cell. During glycolysis, glucose is converted to two pyruvate acids. So we start with 6 carbons, and ultimately at the end, we get 2 pyruvate acids, each which have 3 carbons. And cellular respiration is pretty confusing and complex, so I just focus on the inputs and mainly the outputs, specifically how much ATP for each part of the cycle, because there's a lot of steps and it can be hard to comprehend. And glycolysis produces 2 ATP molecules. We start with 2 and then we get 4. Next is the intermediate stage, which is also called the bridge. For the intermediate stage, we're going to use those 2 pyruvic acids that have the 3 carbons each, the 2 ATP from glycolysis, and coenzyme A, which is also called 2-acetyl-CoA, and that's going to go into the mitochondria. If you remember from high school or middle school, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and that's going to be where the cell uses, the mitochondria uses nutrients from the body to then be used in the cells to then be created into energy, which we are going to use. The 2 coenzyme A and 2 NADH are what is going to be our output, and the most important part from this step is that the goal is for carbon dioxide to be released. However, there's 2 types of respiration. There's aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic is with oxygen, so you can think like aerobic exercises where you're breathing and you need more oxygen. And anaerobic is without. Glycolysis can happen with both aerobic and anaerobic respiration, but if we're going to produce that carbon dioxide, you need to have oxygen, or else the 2 pyruvic acids from glycolysis are going to ferment and create lactic acid, which I'll connect back to running at the end. So that part is important to remember. Next is the citric acid cycle. The inputs are going to be the 2 coenzyme A, which are right here. And our most important outputs are going to be 2 carbon dioxide, so that's what we want. And then 6 NADH, 2 FADH2, and then again, the most important thing is we're going to be producing 2 more ATP. Lastly is the electron transport chain. This is where the most ATP is made. What's our input is NADH, FADH, and then oxygen. And this again is all occurring in the mitochondria. And our output is going to be water and ATP, so H2O and ATP. At the end, for the electron transport chain, it's around 34 ATPs that were in total used throughout cellular respiration. However, because you need ATP, you need more energy to do the processes that also create ATP. So throughout the 3 parts of the cycles, you're going to be losing some of the ATP that's being made. So it's more like 27 to 30 ATP at the end. Here's a visual of the electron transport chain, just to make it a little bit easier. So this is all happening in the mitochondria. We have our input, which is the NADH, the FADH, and we have our output, which is going to be the two hydrogens and oxygen. They're going to make H2O. So that's our sweat when we exercise. And then the other most important thing is the output, which is going to be the total ATP. And after this, the ATP is going to go to ATP synthase, where it's going to release energy. So that's the end goal of cellular respiration, is to convert our chemical energy to then release energy that we can use for usable energy. How does this relate to exercise? So the topic I chose is running because that's what I like to do. And when we're running, our body is performing cellular respiration just as it is with every other process that we do. But specifically with running, our heart rate is going up and our breath is increasing and we're breathing out more carbon dioxide. So we need more oxygen to be taken in. And this is why we need cellular respiration to occur. So the food that we eat during the day, the energy can then be used by our body so we can run. We sweat, which is going to be using that H2O, the water that was produced from the electron transport chain. And we also are going to be warmed up as we move our body around. And we're going to need to cool down, which is why we sweat, from the heat. In this process of expiring energy, so we're using up that energy that the cellular respiration made, we're going to be using up the ATP. And that's when the cycle is just going to continue. We're going to need more energy because we're using it up. An important thing with running, which connects back to the beginning, is that without sufficient oxygen, as you remember with the aerobic and anaerobic parts in glycolysis, the pyruvic acid is going to go to fermentation instead of producing that CO2 in the bridge or the intermediate stage, and it's going to produce lactic acid. If you've ever heard of people talking about a lactic acid threshold, or when they're running super hard and like the legs start to ache and you're going into that lactic acid threshold, that is because when you're running and you're needing more oxygen during cellular respiration, there's not enough to perform glycolysis and get the CO2. So that's why lactic acid is created from the pyruvic acid, the pyruvates. Ultimately, when this happens, the muscles contract less efficiently. So this is something that you can notice when you exercise. You can just think back to cellular respiration, that perhaps you're creating lactic acid right now. And that's why it's important for the body, because it helps us perform our everyday tasks, especially something like exercise, where you're going to be needing oxygen faster and you're going to be breathing out more CO2, and you're ultimately going to need to be taking in more glucose, so more food, so your body can use that for cellular respiration and to just do all the things that you need to do. And this is the end of my project, so thank you for listening.